Welcome to Strength Chat.
Oh, wait.
Normally I do that.
Welcome.
That was nice.
Did you do that on purpose?
They like
I
that.
just want to get him flustered.
Welcome to Strength Chat with your host, the mad scientist of strength. Yes, that's right, Chris Duffin, myself. Over here harassing me on the right, he is back, the one, the only, our mature athlete and coach, Dr. Cadleb.
Really got a new handle now. It used to be Dr. Rudolph. Now I'm official. You use my last name.
That's right.
All right.
I prepped you up a little bit today. To my left, we have the man I hate as of the last few weeks because my training program has me deadlifting like a lot, like over 800. I think 3 times a week now, conventional. Not. I slept. You know what I did this weekend? I slept.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Saturday.
I hear we're going to talk
slept.
about that today.
Sunday.
I
slept.
slept.
We are going to talk about that today.
Is
Actually,
that your
yeah.
research? Just decide to go and do it?
No, I just kind of needed it.
Uh-huh.
It's
I like
Yeah,
the
I saw you in here Saturday, and I thought you needed something after that failed deadlift attempt.
yeah. So
yeah, why'd you come in the next day and deadlift? That wasn't good.
no, Saturday was my scheduled deadlift day.
You deadlifted Friday too?
No, I deadlifted Thursday.
2 days in a row at some point.
No.
Oh.
I came in Saturday, was third deadlift session of the week, and I was feeling beat up. So instead of doing the 880 that I was supposed to do, I decided I was going to do 675 for 20 conventional. It's going to be
And he
so,
does a big build up for this. Andre, bring the camera out.
Music's on.
Oh, he did it for a single.
Turn the music up higher. Here we go. Well, exactly.
I stand up with it, and it was so slow. I just stood there.
It was like just 0.18.
That was like.
I just stood there, and I'm just like thinking to myself, I'm like, okay. Should I do this? Because it ain't going to be 20, that's for sure. It is probably not going to be 10 today. So I set it down. After all the build-up, I did 675 for a single.
I saw that. That was that's kind of like in the last few weeks of my meet prep when I would take like 700 milligrams of caffeine just to miss my top set and then go home and not sleep all night and be mad.
So yeah, after that I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna. Well, I had to run to my son's
I don't
soccer.
think you had a choice.
I had to run to my I had to run to my kid's soccer game after that, and I'm like, well, I could go back Sunday and make it up, and then I decided, yeah, I'll just relax on Sunday.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, you look like you needed sleep. So anyway, we ended up all wearing the same shirt today. Anti-Fragile. How's that work? We need to check in with each other when we're having a podcast, especially one that's
what's the
filmed.
worst is when we ever have to fly and we're all wearing at least one version of the same shirt or sweatshirt.
That's
Like
okay.
5 to 7
That's
of us
okay
getting on
because
the
that's a
plane.
marketing opportunity.
The airport attendants go, "Oh, what team are you?" And we're like, "Oh, well, it's easier if we don't tell you."
It's a world
It
team.
would make more sense if we don't tell you.
It's a world dominant team for sure.
Yes.
Well, we actually are, just to make our guest today feel comfortable, we got her a Anti-Fragile shirt today too. So we're all going to be.
Actually, she requested it, so we didn't force it. We didn't force it. So speaking of, really excited to have on Dr. Stasha Gominak today. She is a neurologist that specializes in sleep disorders, and I've been reading some of her material, listening to some interviews, and just really excited to have a discussion today because it's kind of paralleled some of my own journeys in health over the last 3 to 5 years as I was listening to it, because she was explaining some things, and I'm like, oh my god, that's what I went through, and oh my god, that's 2 years later this happened just like she said would happen. So welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's so many people, when they think about performance in athletics, it's all about the training. It's all about the work being done, and we preach a lot the balance of recovery and doing things right in training, but there's so many things that you could have the best program in the world and still fall apart if you don't take care of them. And one of those is sleep.
That's absolutely right. And what I would preach to my patients would be if you do not get paralyzed correctly in sleep, which is something that no one's really covered very well. But in your field, if you're actually adding weight and you're asking your tendon and your muscle to adapt to that, you can only really effectively do that if you paralyze that part of the body during deep sleep.
So by paralyzed, are you talking about REM or?
You actually get paralyzed in slow wave sleep and in REM. And I don't think we're actually completely sure that dreaming only happens in REM, but it appears to me from the literature I've read that most of the physical repair that relies on growth hormone happens only in slow wave sleep. So there's a really important part, especially for bodybuilders, that growth hormone has a very specific message, but that the receivers of those messages are different. There are many different hormones that respond, but they probably are set up to respond differently when you're sleeping than when you're awake. So we repair only when there's supervision. So that's not a concept that's very much in the literature yet, but the brain has to be paying attention. Let me use an analogy because I think this is a lot easier to understand. If you think of growth happening in children, growth only happens in response to growth hormone that only is released in slow wave sleep. They do not grow while they're awake. They only grow in slow wave sleep. If that growth hormone has multiple different growth receptors, for instance, muscle hormone, nerve growth hormone, lymphatics growth hormone, artery growth hormone, all of those are individual, but they come together as a team so that the entire limb grows, not just the bone, but all the other things have to grow. Who makes sure that both limbs grow at the same length? That team can't be doing it. They're not on the other arm. It has to be the brain. That means there's a period of time every night when all our brain is doing is supervising. If you analogize that growth to adults, it turns out when we go through puberty, the release of growth hormone from the brain is continuous in children, becomes pulsatile in adults. To me, that means it's exactly the same message. It probably has the same receivers of that message, but it means, oh, we're not going to grow anymore. We're just going to repair. We think that we're the same person when we get out of bed in the morning, but actually, all sorts of cells were repaired and replaced. And they had all these things happen to them. All of that is related to a specific phase of sleep. For the moving parts, you must get that part paralyzed, just like you can't fix a pump when it's pumping. You have to turn it off, take it apart, and then fix it.
So the pulsatization that you're talking about occurs in the evening. The pituitary gland releases growth hormone in adults during sleep.
But not just in the evening. It's actually linked. You have to be able to transition into slow wave sleep for that to happen. That means children that don't grow, they are sleeping, but they aren't getting into deep sleep. So when they measure their growth hormone level, yeah, it's low. But it's not because there's something wrong with their pituitary per se. It's because they are not achieving slow wave sleep.
So, I mean, it's like quality is everything. We have to understand that just laying down and having sleep is not appropriate. It's got to be the right type of sleep with the right quality. Now, what causes us to not get into those correct states?
Great question, Chris.
That sounded like a setup.
That is what actually had me very frustrated for the longest time. So what happened to me was I was not trained in sleep. I'm a general neurologist. I'm following hundreds of patients with daily headache, epilepsy, strokes, etc. And all of a sudden, one of my headache patients demands a sleep study, and I don't know anything about it, so I say no. And she says, well, I don't care if you want to. You need to give me a sleep study. My husband says I snore like a train. So she's not fat. She's 32. She has no medical problems. And she goes for a sleep study, and she comes back, and she has terrible sleep apnea, and that's interesting. what's pivotal is she puts on this CPAP mask and her headaches go away. And I have this biologic chemical pattern in my head of how that should happen, and blowing air up the nose does not fit in that pattern. But headache patients are desperate. I've done medicines with them forever. They'll do anything because the medicines work for a while if you're lucky. So I start doing sleep studies on all my headache patients, and most of them don't have sleep apnea. They just don't go into REM. They just have no REM. So now over a 5-year span, I have over 1,000 patients with sleep studies that show they have very little or no REM, or they just stop breathing in REM. That's the only time they stop breathing. Maybe they only stop breathing 8 times, but they only have a half an hour of REM. The report comes back to me as once an hour, not significant. Well, wait a minute, you just took the half an hour that we're supposed to have 2.5 to 3, and you woke her up 8 times. That's really not the same. So it took a number of years for me to start really being frustrated with the results of the sleep studies. And then, why? Why aren't they getting into REM? Why aren't they getting into slow wave sleep? Why am I doing sleep studies in 8-year-olds who I know their growth is linked to this? They're not getting into those phases. Why? And I don't know, and no one else is writing about it. And then by complete weird accident, one of my patients has a B12 deficiency, so I start drawing B12 levels, and then somebody mentions vitamin D, and there was a lot of pain as part of this story, not just headache,
Right. Yep.
body pain. So I threw that in there, and it turns out that vitamin D is one of the reasons why we do not get into deep sleep. That is the most common and the most important one, but there are others that play a huge role too.
Wait, to be clear, so a lack of vitamin D or too much vitamin D?
Both.
Okay.
If you start supplementing with oral vitamin D, the same thing happens when you go over a blood level of 80. You don't sleep as well and you start to have pain.
So, and typically we get vitamin D from sunlight.
Yes.
And of course we have less of that here in Portland, but more than some other areas. But with the weather out, it's getting to be that time of year, right?
One of the things I'd say about Portland is Portland exercises outside despite the rain.
Mm-hmm.
It is a much more athletically minded population than what I was dealing with in East Texas, where it is really too hot to exercise outside, or at least as you get physically weak when you don't sleep, you can't really tolerate higher temperatures. As we were really designed to be able to tolerate those temperatures, but we can't anymore. Now you can change that. You can go back.
So, you know, one thing, you know, we're talking about supplementing vitamin D, helping with sleep, but, you know, we want to be clear that we're not saying if you're lacking sleep just to go out and buy a bottle of vitamin D. Like the message there is it can be a contributor, but you need to get blood work and manage your health. Like this is the reason that everybody should have a primary care physician, and I believe getting blood work at least once a year, if not twice a year, to know what's going on with both the vitamin D levels as well as vitamin B. And there's a lot of other things that play a role in it too, like you know, absorption. You know, there's a lot of things that factor with absorption of those and everything else. So, you know, you need to know what your magnesium levels are, boron, like all these sorts of things, right?
That is right. And one of the things that happened is because I was a novice with the chemical that actually is a hormone. So the problem is it's called a vitamin, therefore we all have a framework in which to assess vitamins. And we think, oh, I can go to the store, they're cheap, they're easy, I don't have to worry about them, and I can take them without my doctor's supervision. That's not true. That's not, especially not true for vitamin D. It is a hormone. It should never be called a vitamin. It's dangerous that it's called a vitamin. You can't just go into the store and buy testosterone. There's a really good reason for that. You really shouldn't be able to just walk in and buy vitamin D. Now, it turns out, because the doctors are so ill-informed, including myself, and we know so little about this, it's probably lucky that patients can go get it, but you have to be very careful with it. You have to understand that it needs a level. If I were to tell you, Chris, I just examined you, I think it's your thyroid, here, I'm going to give you a prescription for thyroid, you would say to me, wait a minute, don't you have to do some blood work? don't you have to know what my thyroid levels are? You can't just do that. It's exactly the same for vitamin D. And because vitamin D runs the pituitary, it runs thyroid releasing hormone, it runs the gonadotropin releasing hormones. That means all the hormones are linked together, and vitamin D is one of them. That means you really have to know what you're doing.
So vitamin D is not a vitamin, and so unlike other vitamins where if you overdose on it, the body just passes those off in the urine, vitamin D can have a deleterious effect if you take too much. Is that what you're saying?
It is absolutely true. And I lived through it. It was horrible. And then I realized I had just done it to several of my patients. So one of the difficult parts of this is hormones move very slowly, and when you're depleted in a hormone, it turns out there are all these repairs that haven't been made. So you actually use a lot more of it at the beginning than you do later. That's not published yet. It's not like, oh, there's a specific requirement. Every single human being needs a different vitamin D dose, and they need a different dose today than they will need in 5 years. That's a really hard concept.
Right. Again, back to the manage your health and get regular blood work.
And unfortunately, this literature around vitamin D has a lot of chemicals that are all called vitamin D, but they're really not the same. So there is if you want to use this to manage your sleep, there is a lot of learning. I have a website that's dedicated just to that. There's a second piece that you mentioned, which is that we've been taught that the B vitamins are safe to mess around with. And it turns out that's a lie. There are 2 B vitamins, and there may be more. The one that I think is safe, that you can't overdose on, is B12. But there are actually 8 of them. One of them is B5, and you absolutely can overdose on that. And each person needs a different dose, and you can't look at the blood levels. There are articles that show that in the 1970s, there's one article, there's another in the 1980s, that there are stores of B5. That means our blood level doesn't reflect those stores, much like magnesium. B6, it's the same. So those 2 vitamins you have to be careful with, and that means that if you're depleted today, but if we get your intestinal bacteria to come back, it is my belief that all of the B vitamins have always been supplied by the intestinal bacteria. Bacteria were the source of the Bs forever. That's why other animals, like the squirrels, do not go into CVS and buy vitamins. They have their own source.
So, you know, I mentioned to you before walking in here, I'm in love with my non-pasteurized sauerkraut that I have every day. This last year,
We're all in love with it too, by the way.
It's been quite helpful, has it not?
It's been helpful.
Because it certainly helps with GI issues and the known Duffin bombs.
Well, it smells better than it used to smell around here, I'll tell you that.
But yeah, I mean, you're talking about vitamin D, you're talking about vitamin B, and these things are all things that we should be able to have in our natural environment, but we've changed our environments, right?
I have to say, Chris, if they're complaining about the smell of your farts, then there is still work to be done. And let me tell you what you can do.
Please tell us.
My doctors had no
We're on the
idea.
verge.
And it turns out there are certain bacteria in your gut that can handle sulfur-containing proteins that are in onions, garlics, and other things. I could eat garlic in huge amounts until I was 35, and then I remember the day when I couldn't anymore. And that happens in a lot of people, and that turns out to be a very nice monitor of when your microbiome went bad, okay? So I'm taking probiotics, and my patients are taking probiotics, and I suspect that the microbiome change has happened with the vitamin D deficiency epidemic, because when I was in medical school, irritable bowel syndrome did not exist. It was not described. So the timing is real similar. So I expected when I added back this vitamin D, and I've got all these people on vitamin D, and their vitamin D levels are perfect, and they're sleeping better, that their IBS would go away. And sadly, it did not. So I thought, vitamin D, it probably is a cofactor for these bugs, but I am not a gastroenterologist, so I wasn't very knowledgeable. It turns out that what your bugs want is each other. They are a specific foursome. If you go around the world and measure what are the bacterial species in every 3-month-old that's living outdoors, you will find those bugs. And we are not giving them sauerkraut. we are giving them breast milk. That means those bugs want to be in there. They have always wanted to be in there. The squirrels are not eating sauerkraut. They have always gone into our belly because that foursome is a commensal foursome. One makes riboflavin that another one needs. That other one makes thiamine that this one needs. They make 8 B vitamins, actually 7, and they create a B vitamin soup in our intestine that promotes the growth of that foursome. And it discourages the growth of other bad bacteria. That means it guarantees that you will stay with that same foursome the rest of your life, and you won't necessarily have to add new bacterial sources. So the problem with probiotics and fecal transplant, as soon as the doctors came up with they were going to stick poop from somebody else into me or my patient, I was not going to go there.
Okay, I haven't heard of this one.
Fecal transplant.
No, please tell me that's not a real thing.
It is absolutely the real. Okay, so as soon as you start saying, gee, doctors come up with the weirdest ideas, you realize that the whole idea of supplying certain bacterial species, if they don't stick, if they don't take over and become the dominant species, they're really not working. Because we really didn't, when I was growing up, we did not know any of that because we didn't need to know it. We did not have IBS. There was not celiac disease showing up in 9-year-olds. So ultimately, the vitamin D is a major player at maintaining your microbiome. Once you start vitamin D, once it gets to a certain level, usually over 40, then the bacteria are starting to use it as a cofactor. If you suck it all up because you're really depleted, they will not have any. But the second piece is you must add something called B50, that is all 8 vitamins, all 8 Bs, 50 milligrams of each, in order to flood the intestinal tract, because A, that used to get its thiamine from B, is piles of poop away from B now. It's got all this other bacteria there. But if you take D and you add B50 for 3 months, you must stop it because the bugs grow back, because now they're happy, they have everything they need. They will become your continuous source of the B vitamins from then on. That means if you stay on my pills and you have a healthy microbiome, you will start to get pain and sleep disruption because you just doubled the dose.
So, with my comment about the sauerkraut, it was maybe it was a statement, but maybe more of a question, because that's, you know, we do a lot of things like supplementing the vitamin D, supplementing the vitamin B, taking the prebiotics, in which my case, eating sauerkraut on top of doing that, but that's all trying to force the situation to make it work and function right when something has broken to begin with to make it not work, right?
Mm-hmm. What we've changed is the fact that we used to live outdoors. We are not nocturnal animals. Rats, who are the people who they studied for vitamin D, are nocturnal animals. That means they don't go out in the sun. That means they have to be able to use D that's made by fungus that grows on grains. It's a different D source. That particular change was really a huge change throughout the globe when air conditioning came. And as soon as air conditioning air conditioned buildings, and we now have very few people who, even when they're farming, only if you're farming rice, you still have to have either a water buffalo, there are an occasional mechanized machine that will do it, but because you're up to your knees in water, they still have to be outdoors. All of humankind have moved indoors. If you're farming in Texas, you have an air-conditioned tractor. You are not directly in the sun. That means the vitamin D was the first domino to fall, but to get your sleep back, you have to have all the Bs in the doses that were naturally made by our microbiome. There are specific doses, they interact with each other, they use each other as cofactors, and there is a natural dose. We don't really know what that is. No one has measured the vitamin Bs being created by the intestinal microbiome on a minute-to-minute basis. We don't know that data. And the reason why I got to it is I realized the B vitamins that I was starting to use could keep people from sleeping. 40 of the 50 people I gave it to came back and said, this stuff nearly killed me. I couldn't sleep at all, and I was all agitated, and I felt weird. And I was like, how could that be? That's on the shelf at the health food store. That's really bad. Why is this happening? So I spent another 4 or 5 years with my patients coming back And every single thing, this is the most important message of the whole day. Everything your body tells you, it's right. You may not know why. You may not get an answer from the doctor, but you didn't make it up. Your body is telling you something. And then the next question is, okay, can we fix that? And then we doctors, we make up an answer. We make it up. We do the best we can, but it's made up. That means you should always trust your own body's message.
Instead of, you should be better, okay, I'm better.
Yeah.
So you're saying, if I understand, so both B and D are generated in the gut?
No, the D is not generated in the gut. It's only generated one place, on your skin.
Okay.
Only when your skin is touched by UVB light. Just that wavelength. Now, the first question that makes this understandable in my point of view is, why would we make a hormone from UVB light? Because as you move away from the equator, the only wavelength that changes between winter and summer is the UVB wavelength. So there was actually a really smart guy who taught me, who had this entire framework that said, oh, well, this would be why, gee, vitamin D should be then linked to our metabolism, so we can gain weight in the winter and we can make it through the winter when there's no food. It should be related to our reproduction, so we don't pop out babies when there is no food. We should be able to change several things about our body in relationship to what season it is. How do we do that? The bears don't really just say, I think I'm going to go to sleep now. They have a whole set of chemical messages. Vitamin D goes down, the thyroid goes down, they sleep. If you look at humans, they actually used to sleep 18 hours. You've got you, 8 kids, your wife in a little teepee, there's 4 feet of snow, there's no food. What do? Pretty much you hibernate. You know, your kids are you're gonna kill them if they're all up and doing stuff. If they sleep for 18 hours and all they have is a piece of dried meat a week, they're likely to make it through that winter. Our forebears that could adjust the calories they use and how much metabolism they do. It turns out someone with a low D, you can actually give them 1,000 calories, videotape them in a hospital, and they can still gain weight. That's how obesity has happened in this country. You can't get humans to 450 pounds when they live outside. It didn't happen. That's why they had fat ladies at a circus, because it was so rare. Now it's very common. You really physically can't get them to that kind of a level of obesity if you live outside.
That's interesting.
So vitamin D, which is not a vitamin, is a hormone, actually helps to control body weight?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And more importantly, if you eat certain calories, so what you guys are trying to do is you're manipulating the calories and you're learning all this stuff about the gut. Unfortunately, in the person who has the wrong microbiome, their ghrelin and leptin levels are not normal because they're linked to the microbiome. Mm-hmm. That means you're trying to manipulate those levels. Now that we know about them, my level of hunger and what I do with my calories is run by the microbiome.
Yeah, I think there's a fair bit of plenty of research out there on the microbiome's effect on where the calories go. With fat tissue, muscle tissue, and I think that's really important. So there's a lot of people in the the diet world that love to just focus solely on macros and say that's the only thing that matters. Mm-hmm. And there's some validity to that approach, but the same thing, like what you eat affects the microbiome, which then again is going to affect the output.
And the smell in the office. And one of the other things that happened to me was I'm doing all this vitamin D, and I think, we're giving Chris a hard time here, but I think that, I was thinking that vitamin D would cure the whole thing. I was really enthusiastic about that. And there were really 3 things that didn't get cured by the vitamin D. The IBS, or irritable bowel, the microbiome by supposition, they didn't lose weight. I had some women that were over 350 pounds who were walking every day at noon when it was 100 degrees. That was like a miracle for them. They felt so much better, they were sleeping so much better, but they didn't lose weight. And that was really unsettling. I felt like there's obviously something missing here. The third really important part is the pain kept going up and up and up. As we got to end of 2 years with vitamin D, even if the vitamin D was exactly right, more joint pain, more burning in the feet, more back pain, more feeling stiff and old when I wake up. There was something else that wasn't right. And that is really all about the B vitamins. The B vitamins affect a bunch of different things, but they are heavily involved in our pain.
Neuropathy as well?
Yes. So the part that's published and clearly already there is B6. B6 can cause a neuropathy, burning in the feet when it's too low, but it can cause the same thing when it's too high. It was that and the knowledge of that that made me feel more confident about my ideas with the B5, that clearly if B5 can make my patients not able to sleep, and there's other literature that says you need it to sleep, that means it's moving the dial for the sleep, but you have to know the dose. And there is no literature about the dose. The literature that I had was 400 milligrams, and it was wrong for most, not all. So the second piece was B5 behaves very similarly. You can get all the burning in your feet that's on television is diabetic neuropathy. It is not diabetic neuropathy. It is a vitamin deficiency, and it can be replaced. And not only will that replacement make your burning go away, but it'll make your pancreatic islet cells start to behave, because they are deficient in B6 and B5, just like your nerves are. So neuropathy is relatively rare in comparison to what's common, which is my bowels aren't right, I have pain all over the place. So arthritic pain is just one of them. There are many others. This is where fibromyalgia came from. So similarly, when I was in medical school, no sleep apnea, no fibromyalgia, no chronic fatigue, and no IBS. Those have all come together. Fibromyalgia is actually the muscles contracting while you're sleeping, in the phase where you're supposed to be paralyzed. So if you have a little wire from a little tiny bit of cells that are in your brainstem, and it runs to every single muscle in your body, every single one, your eye muscles, your cheek muscles, your jaw muscles, your ear muscles, every single one of those gets turned off, they have to be able to turn them on again, or you would be paralyzed forever. That means you can activate the muscles too. So my patients with fibromyalgia, over time, I began to realize that muscle pain frequently appears in a setting of already having joint pain and headache. They have several different things going on. B5 makes cortisol. You don't have the raw material, you don't make cortisol. That means every time I replace that, if I give you growth hormone, if I give you steroids of any kind, I'm trying to somehow make this whole be better. Instead, you want it to be whole, like W-H-O-L-E. You want the whole to go back to operating on its own.
We're just out there attacking those peripheral outputs, right?
Yes.
There appears to be a lot of them. I was actually going to ask how that related to fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, because I had a feeling that that was somewhat related.
Yeah, and the fibromyalgia has always been, one, they're always treated like they're crazy. And by the time they have fibromyalgia, they are pretty crazy, because they don't sleep, they don't have the right neurotransmitters, so they can't think. So it's not just one part of their body. And the weirdest part of this whole thing for me is, I don't care about vitamins. I'm not trained in them. What I'm doing is trying to figure out how to make my patients better, and I'm really focused on sleep. If I can make somebody sleep better, so many things get better. But the CPAP device is a patch, and it only lasts for a while. The disease continues to get worse in the background. That means anybody we put a CPAP mask on, it's only going to help them for 3 or 4 years. They still, and many of them go back and say, you know, I felt so good in the first couple of years, and now I just don't feel as good. And I thought about that a lot and said, well, why? The disease is getting worse. You're getting too paralyzed. That's what apnea is. You're getting too paralyzed. This part is getting too paralyzed. It's not just about how big your neck is. It's not just about how fat. We have little kids who are 8 who don't have any airway problem when you look in there who have sleep apnea. That means it's not just one thing, but that means apnea is a part of being paralyzed. Kicking is a part of being paralyzed. Contracting all your muscles between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., which is when it usually happens, so that you can actually get up at night, walk to the bathroom, and come back to bed, and then go back to sleep. And I'd say, well, did you have much pain when you're walking to the bathroom at 3 a.m.? And they say, no, you know, that's so weird. I wonder if I just wasn't paying attention, but I don't feel, and then I go back into bed, and then I sleep, and I wake up at 6:30, and I feel like I'm all beat up. That paralysis that's not happening, it's activating the muscles, is actually making you feel worse because you just got into REM. Unfortunately, when I give you vitamin D, it makes your brain get into REM more effectively. So what I was actually seeing without understanding it is my patients are changing from D deficient and B deficient, but I don't know anything about them. Now I'm putting more and more D on board. They're trying to repair more and more. Every single repair is made with the B vitamins. Every single repair cannot be done without a B vitamin. That means we're using more B vitamins as I make you sleep better, and that means you'll change from a D deficient patient to a B deficient patient. And the pain goes up and up and up.
And you were saying in the interview that's about a 2-year process for that to happen, which I thought was really interesting because that's what I've been through myself. So started supplementing vitamin D because the levels were low, and about 2 years in, my vitamin B levels went in the tank. And then that's been resolved since. But when I listen, I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So.
Which makes me feel better because what I'm writing about is what my patients have reported to me. And this, I was by accident the first person to ask the question. If every single one of my headache patients has a low vitamin D and every single one of them can't get into REM, is there a level of D that might help them get into REM? And there just happen to be articles that show anatomically there are vitamin D receptors all over these switches that we know allow you to switch in and out of REM. That literature's been there since the 80s. No one paid attention to it, which is unfortunate. It turns out that vitamin D does very different things in different parts of our body. And because of that, the literature is exploding. Vitamin D is in every part of our body and has different effects. Even the experts, quote unquote, who have been doing the most research do not really know what the right level is. So by accident, because I knew nothing about it, I just asked my patients. They would say, oh, my headache's gone last week. And I'd go, oh, that's great. What's your D level? I don't know. Oh, I was so much of a novice that I didn't even ask them to do a D level before they came in. So it's a blinded study because they don't know, I don't know. And I just asked hundreds of them. Your headaches went away last week. Let's get your vitamin D level. And how's your sleep? Much better. So we published the first article that says when you go over 80, you will be sorry. You may not realize it's that, but you will be sorry. Your sleep will go bad and most people get pain. If you go under 60, your sleep will not be as good. And that has been very, very consistent over all my patients, over 5,000 patients now.
It's a pretty tight window.
It's a very tight, it's not a realistic window if you don't live at the equator. So there's also a body of literature that says if you live at the equator and you have the right color skin for where you are on the planet and you're outside all day, okay, you are in your milpa and you're digging with a stick and you're planting corn, and there's still cultures that still do that in Mexico. I happen to have a house near towns where they still do that. You cannot run your vitamin D level up over 80 by being in the sun. There are already natural processes that stop making it. Now, that's not the case for someone from Scotland who moves to Texas and starts to plow their 40 acres they got in Oklahoma or Texas. They are not set up to be in that place, therefore they burn, and they actually can do all sorts of bad things to their body, okay? Also, when you take supplements, you can easily run your D over 80. And you won't know it. It happens so slowly. I have several patients who started on 2,000 10 years ago. 10 years later, they're still on 2,000, but last year, they actually broke their level over 60. It's taken 10 years to go from a level of 20 to a level of 60. My headache patients don't want to wait 10 years. So I actually got up into bigger levels, bigger doses. The doses that fit within biology, if you have a light-colored skin and you lie by the pool and you're 20 years old, in 4 or 5 hours you can make 20,000. That's the maximum that we make biologically. So
okay.
That's the highest dose I've ever felt comfortable giving in a patient at the beginning. Now, I did have patients who required higher than that, but it took a long time for me to feel confident to give bigger than that. So I usually recommend most people start much lower than that in like 2,000 to 5,000 range. But just remember that this is now kind of filling little holes in your body, and as you use less, in year 5 or 6 you may use a little bit less, and now it's going into stores. So now it's taking 10 years. You would never think that your improvement in sleep at year 10 is related to vitamin D. There's no way to put that together. So it was only because I was pushing the envelope, trying to get these headache patients to get better faster, that we could actually say, oh, this is how it comes that way.
A little bit of a side question. How long did this journey take to be where you're at now from when it started?
12 years, really. If you count, my view of how to look at this stuff was based in 5 years of CPAP devices and sleeping pills. So there's a lot to learn about sleeping pills. Every single person likes a different sleeping pill. One, I had to start giving them, which I was totally against them. But two, I realized if I could get them sleeping, even if it turns out that crappy sleep that's not perfect is better than no sleep. So drugged sleep is better, and it also turns out that the body always knows which drug it likes. And I would sometimes use 22 different sleeping pills before we found one that the body liked. And every single one of these pills is duplicating what's missing chemically in the brain. That's why it works. So when it doesn't work, it means that's not what you're missing, and then you stop it. And the only reason why I know that is because I was able with these vitamins to get my patients to not only go, now they're in this hole where they don't have this neurotransmitter mix. Now they get the D and the Bs, and they start to, those D and Bs go into the cells that make the neurotransmitters, they make the right neurotransmitters, and all of a sudden, that Klonopin that they've been taking for 8 years at 3 milligrams, which is a whopper dose, starts to make them feel drugged in the morning. They start to climb out of the hole, and I always have to warn them, look, you thought your effect of this medicine wore off. We see that all the time. I needed this much. We say they're addictive. You need to use more and more. The reason why you use more and more is the illness is still going on in the background. You're not replacing what the brain wants. Once you do that, then you can slowly come off whatever sleeping pill you're using. Your body will tell you when to do that. I have to gift you with trusting your own body. That's not the way we do it right now. It's always, I, the doctor, know what I'm doing. You don't know anything, so shut up and do what I tell you. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work doing this.
So we talk about optimal sleep. It seems like there's a huge range of sleep amounts that people experience and seem to do well on or not. So in your experience or what you know, so as an example, I feel like I need at least 9 hours to feel like fully rested and like able to perform the next day, whereas like some people I know need like 5 and they feel great. So what are those? Are they getting into those deep sleep waves sooner and staying there longer? What are those differences?
Stop me if I go too long, but what happened to me was because I was not formally trained in sleep, I tried to put away my expectations. Most of my patients have really two things they can do. They can go to the pulmonologist and get a CPAP device, or they can take sleeping pills or not. Those are really the only choices. Because of that, we've made up all these stories about the fact that, oh, you only need 5 hours, because what if you really wanted 8? Well, what if you felt, oh, I only get 5 hours and I really run out of steam around 3 p.m. and I said, you know, 5 hours, that's okay for a little while, but normal humans, and I'll tell you what happened to me, normal humans really need 8, and it might be a sign to you that you really have vitamin D and B deficiency, and if you just do this for 3 months, you can fix yourself. It turns out I hear a lot of stories from patients. I had a lot of stories from patients who said, I sleep 5 hours and that's all I need. I seem to function fine. But it turns out if you ask them a little bit more in depth, they actually don't feel that good, and they've always not slept very well, and their body is used to it. That person may actually meet me in the hospital because they have Guillain-Barré syndrome. Now, they never complained about their sleep, and I had to learn to ask specific questions. How's your sleep? Doesn't give you what you need. When they come in with Guillain-Barré, that means their immune system is not right. So I have a whole different way of looking at it. So one, if you sleep for 5 hours, you are more at risk for all the illnesses that can happen to humans. Let me talk about it in another way. So because I didn't have any preconceived ideas, I didn't tell my patients they were doing it right or wrong. What I did was to say, okay, let's see what happens when we put these vitamins in there. What happened was, they all go to sleep at 10 and they wake up at 6. Even my patients who are really, really sick, like paralyzed for the last 3 years with some horrible neurologic illness, finally, into the 3rd year, I realized I haven't asked about their sleep. Their vitamin D is 8, and I also haven't asked what kind of work they used to do before they got paralyzed, because I didn't know them then, and they've been working nights for the last 20 years. People who succeed at working nights are the sickest people on the planet. Normal humans cannot stay awake at night, therefore they get fired. They're found in a closet, sleeping, and they're out of there. So that means if you're able to work nights, you do not have the right physiology at night. And it turns out, once you get the vitamin D and the B's right, it'll take much longer for the person who is sleeping during the day. But even those people, if you just let them alone and you say, your brain can only sleep at the wrong time, but that's when it wants to sleep. You just let it sleep then. They will slowly convert to falling asleep at 10 and waking up at 6.
I'm on the 9-10 hour sleep train.
That means we
seven hours and I'm a mess.
You have reserve. You have other repairs to make. There's 2 things about that. One, when we don't have enough D, like when I'm picturing that 18 hours of sleep when it's winter, we don't do extra deep sleep. We move apart the blocks of deep sleep and we do more light sleep. That means if your D is down around 50, or if you have some other deficiency, so you can't really effectively squish it into the ideal. The ideal is you get everything done in 8 hours and you get a good 3 hours. The other thing I have to do is the patient who's been sick for a while, you have to say, look, your body, now that we've given you what you want, if your levels are right, your body has a bunch of deferred repairs. It wants to sleep more. So where you are on your path after doing B's and D for 2 years might be different than where he is. Many, many patients who say, I have never been able to do less than 9 hours, even since childhood. That means that kid was D deficient in childhood. They've only been able to do 9 hours, and not only that, the brain will only add REM in the morning or occasionally napping. So that means if you try to wake up earlier, like people who train at 4:30 or 5:30 in the morning, they can't make up their REM. They will always be taking away. They will not succeed in the way they'd like to, even though they're very, very, very determined.
And without REM, you can create all kinds of issues with the body and the neurological system. I will announce to our listeners now that I've been using a CPAP for 8 or 10 years. And prior to that, I underwent some severe anxiety disorders. I mean, I was afraid to fall asleep for thinking that I would not wake up again or would not be able to breathe. And after being diagnosed with severe sleep apnea and having the CPAP, it changed my life. I haven't had an anxiety attack ever since. So REM is obviously extremely important.
Absolutely.
Why is that? What is it about? And I know you're not a sleep expert, but what is it?
I'm now self-declared because I have my own ideas.
What is it in REM that changes?
Okay, I'm gonna get into a place that's a little bit different than what you're thinking, but it's not just REM. It turns out it's really the neurotransmitters that allow us to do REM. So there is a chemical called acetylcholine that is a neurotransmitter that is one of the primary players of the parasympathetic nervous system, and it runs our level of alertness during the day, and it runs our sleep at night. The same exact chemical. That implies that it has to stay in this little place all day long. If you're normal and healthy, one, it suggests that if you can't direct your attention, maybe your acetylcholine levels in the frontal lobes aren't right. The second thing is if you don't have acetylcholine to transition into REM, then you can't do all the other stuff, okay? The other fascinating thing is acetylcholine runs the rest and digest side. So the sympathetic nervous system is offset by the parasympathetic nervous system. They have to be both in balance. They're intertwined. If you take away the neurotransmitter that runs the parasympathetic, what you're left with is the other side is running the whole body, and it runs on adrenaline. So you have lots of adrenaline, lots of noradrenaline, and all you feel is not rest and digest. You feel fight, flight all the time. You've patched it to some extent by using the CPAP mask, because when you get into deep sleep with the CPAP mask, one of the things the body does is to make this acetylcholine. It puts it in the vagus nerve, and the vagus sends it out through your whole body. What discouraged me a little bit was that so many of my patients that were using CPAP devices, I thought we should be able to reverse what was happening in the brain. If it wasn't that way 20 years ago, then why aren't we concentrating on fixing those little cells that mean you require this device to help stent your airway? So I became interested because my patients didn't stop breathing. There was still something not allowing them to get into REM. And I had another patient who was so severely affected by sleep apnea that he could fall asleep walking, and he fell and broke his jaw.
Holy crap.
Yeah, that means he was very much into supplements, which I knew nothing about at the time, but between a CPAP mask and another chemical that he brought to me from the internet that I didn't know about, he was actually able to reverse his entire disease all the way to sleeping flat without a CPAP device. That means the concept, it's a proof of concept that you should be able to get these cells all the way back to healthy, so that all of our patients who have to wear CPAP should theoretically be able to taper off and not need it anymore, theoretically. Okay? And it's a little different, and there are a lot of other issues about Parkinson's disease and chemicals and a lot of things that make it not that simple. But one, we know little about REM, and one of the reasons is we study normals. We take normal people and we sleep deprive them. That's not what's wrong with my patients. They have a chemical process that we never described that's happening to their brain. That means sleep depriving normal, healthy people that don't have that chemical disorder does not give you a window into that. The second thing we do is we sleep deprive rats and mice. Why? Because they are cheaper to use, because you can put them in a cage and keep them in a building. Doing it on pigs is a lot more expensive. Pigs are much more like humans, but they have to be outside or they get sick and die. So it turns out most of our studies are in animals that take little naps during the day. Their sleep is in little tiny naps and they're nocturnal. That means, one, we don't ask them. Why not just ask the patients? My patients can tell me so many things about what happened to them in the night, how they felt when they woke up, how do they feel different than they did 2 weeks ago. They can talk. Yet I, as a physician, am trained to tell them they don't know. They don't know anything. My training was, if a patient says they can't sleep, they don't know what they're talking about. They're really asleep. Well, if you send them for an overnight sleep study, what you find is they are in light sleep, but they're tired. They don't get into deep sleep. They know the difference. My teenagers would come in and say, I'm awake all night. I mean, I'm asleep, but I remember what goes on. And some of them have never had deep sleep. Most of the time they're obese. Most of the time they have terrible dentition. They have a palate that's not right. So they focus on this, but in actual fact, they haven't really accomplished getting into deep sleep. I had one teenager who told me, I think I had a seizure. And I said, well, why would you think that? Well, I woke up and my face was in my keyboard. Was it at night? Yeah. She said, I was pulling up a Netflix movie. I was going to watch it. It was about 9:30. And I woke up, my face, and it was like light. And I look at her mom, and her mom looks at her, and we both went, you fell asleep. And she said, no, I didn't. I didn't have a single memory of the whole night. And I realized this kid had never.
That's sleep.
Exactly. We define sleep as the hippocampus, the thing that keeps this video going all day long. The hippocampus flips around and downloads. That means it can't make new memories during the night. But you're not always in that phase. People who cannot do that don't make new memories. So we assign that making new memories to REM. So much of mood, memory, and headache are all linked to the amount of REM. As to whether or not you can do the same things in other phases, we don't exactly know that. Some people think that you can dream in slow wave sleep also. But in general, if you don't get into deep sleep, you don't get repaired. I picture, and I might be wrong, that REM is about mental repair, so the brain doesn't get paralyzed. But I picture slow wave sleep as probably being predominantly physical repair. And that probably means our liver, our pancreas, our intestinal, every single part of our body repairs. Like there are vitamin D receptors on fibroblasts. Every single thing that keeps us hanging together. So I have patients who their heart valve at age 32 melts away. Not infected, nothing anatomically wrong with it. It just melts away. Oh, they put in a new valve. Do they ever check their D level? No. It's 4. There are many, many other parts of that person's body that are barely hanging together. Arteries. Arteries have to be remade every single night. So eventually, as I'm doing this, I realize, oh, this is why we see those aneurysms in the head in the same person I see an abdominal aortic aneurysm. All of their arteries are not repairing. But that also means you can fix them all. The brain remembers how to do that. The body remembers how to do it. But you need a fixed span of time in sleep to turn on that process.
Well, Stasha, this conversation is absolutely fascinating, and I think we could probably go on for a few more hours. So it would be probably good to have you on again at some point so we can further the discussion. But we're getting close to time to wrap up, and I just want to, if someone suspects they have an issue or problem, what's your quick step-by-step guide? I think you mentioned something about a 3-month fix as well. Can you walk us through some of that, and then probably point out your website as well, because it sounds like that is a good resource.
First, go to my website. The first thing to know is that your doctor will not know everything I told you. In fact, they will think it's really weird. I have many clinicians who answer back, vitamin D doesn't have anything to do with sleep. And it's a really new field. Even the vitamin D experts, this is a new field for them, but they recognize that it's related. 1, your doctor may not recognize it. 2, your doctor will be happy to do 1 vitamin D level for you, and it has to be a specific kind, and you really do need to know some details about it. If you're going to use my literature, 60 to 80, you have to know which vitamin D that is. So go on my website, you can find there which one you need to do. The second thing is that your doctor may not want to do another vitamin D level in a month. Once you start supplementing vitamin D, you absolutely have to do another vitamin D level again in a month. You have to see what your body does, what dose you need to move from a level to 20 to a level of 40, or a level of 20 to a level of, oh my goodness, 18. This is bad. Each person is different. So there is a bit of detail to learn. The second piece is, if you start vitamin D and you do not convert your microbiome by adding Bs to it, you will eventually develop pain. And it might be 2 years, it might be 10 years, but you will get pain because you would convert to a B deficient person. And just taking a B complex is a little dangerous, it turns out. So the second thing is, once you do D plus B50 for 3 months, you are different totally chemically in your body. You are now producing your own Bs. Your body is different. That means the reaction of your body to going to a health food store and now buying a huge multivitamin that has 150 milligrams of pantothenic acid or B5 in it will make you sleepless in 2 days. It will be, you're the same person, you can take the same dose. It's a really different way of thinking of vitamins. You will be chemically different than you were before you started this. That means you have to pay attention to the fact that humans were made not to take vitamins. We never took vitamins before 100 years ago. They didn't exist. We made up the concept, we made them into pills. They are not the answer. The answer is, yes, we have to supplement vitamin D. We aren't outside enough. But once you convert the bacteria, then we really aren't made to take vitamins. That actually includes, once your microbiome gets normal, the absorption of things, small charged ions, iron, selenium, magnesium, manganese, boron, iodine, they're all linked to the microbiome. I'm not sure that anybody's published that yet, but I saw that very dramatically, because D by itself did not make the iron absorption go up, but you get the bugs back, and this person's taking pills, and all of a sudden their iron goes right up. Okay? So there's an interaction there too that meant that these supplements that we made as a routine were really in response to a population that had started to fail because their microbiome had failed. So if you go to my website, you can also download a workbook that takes you through the way I think about it, and it actually takes you through an entire year. It tells you what to do every week. Write down your observations. Now it's time to do another D level. Now it's time to stop this. By now you might be getting a little pain, and here's what you do.
And what is that website?
It is drgominak.com.
Any other ways for our listeners to find you or anything that you're doing? Is that the best spot?
For now, it's the best spot, although there is a really good video that Mike Mutzel did with me that introduced me to Chris through a series of turns. But Mike Mutzel has a fabulous biologic-based nutrition, health, called High Intensity Health site, and it's MUTZEL that I'd recommend. He's really smart. He's taught me a lot of things.
Okay. You gentlemen have anything else?
Oh, that was excellent. Thank you so
That's
much for
great. We're definitely going to have her back. There's so many ways we can go with this.
Okay, good.
We can easily fill in another full podcast, so, but thank you for taking the
All
time.
right,
We'll
I'm
have
happy.
you
Thank
back on once we all fix ourselves, and then
Great. And you've all experienced it.
yeah.
And you look great in the anti-fragile shirt.
Thank you.
That's great.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Super. That's
That was
great.
fabulous.
Guys.
So the one question I didn't get to answer, asked, but you mentioned memory. Is it possible that a lack of REM can be tied to Alzheimer's and other memory?
That is the question of the day.
Yeah.
I have
Darn
not.
it, they didn't get that in.
Yeah, I have not seen. So let's. I'll write down, and you guys write down the things that we felt like we didn't get answered, so I don't say the same things over. I do this technique with all of my patients who come in. One of the things that happened to me was, if all these 32-year-olds always complain that their memory's bad, you know, they're in there for a daily headache. But the other two things they have, they're in a bad mood, they're anxious. More than anything, they're anxious, okay? They're anxious and they have a short temper. That all comes with this adrenaline that's too high. And we didn't go down that path, but you guys are now into the stuff about heart rate variability. If you're into breathing, you're into heart rate variability.
Oh yeah.
That means even though these things are hypotheses, because I can't